You're listening to Eating for Eden, episode 49. When it comes to doing something about climate change, your food choices matter. Thanks for tuning in to Eating for Eden, a podcast that takes a food-first approach to climate action. I'm your host, Jessica J. Schroeder, and I am passionate about food that tastes good and does good. I'll guide you with practical tips and help you thoroughly enjoy your food along the way. Last week we talked about how eating a predominantly whole food and minimally processed plant-based diet can be a great strategy for weight loss or maintaining a healthy weight. But what if you don't want to lose weight? What if you're hitting the gym and looking to achieve and maintain muscle gains? Could plant-based eating get in the way? Can a way of eating so well poised to help with weight loss and weight maintenance be suitable for putting on lean muscle? Let's explore this question together. Quick caveat here at the top, I am not a healthcare professional. This is not medical advice, but I do want to help curious listeners understand that it is possible to achieve lean muscle gains while eating plant-based. You don't have to sacrifice your fitness goals for this dietary pattern. Returning to the concept of energy balance we considered last week, let's review. Weight maintenance comes through a balance between energy intake and requirement. Weight gain occurs due to an energy surplus, and weight loss occurs due to an energy deficit. So if you want to gain muscle mass, you need to be in an energy surplus, taking in more than what you're burning. But not only that, you also need to be getting a sufficient amount of protein in order to sufficiently or maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Eating plant-based is not restricted to one kind of outcome. There is a diversity of foods to be consumed within a predominantly to exclusively plant-based dietary pattern. Which ones you choose to emphasize and how much you eat of them makes the difference in which goals they help you to achieve, such as weight loss versus lean muscle gain. Thus, while my advice to those looking to use a plant-based diet to support weight loss was to emphasize things like low calorie density, high water content, and fiber, for those looking to gain muscle, I will have a different set of tips. In short form, these tips are full range of calorie density, high plant protein, and balance. Let's get into these in a bit more detail. First, let's talk about calorie density. In case you didn't catch last week's episode, or in case a refresher would be helpful, I'll restate a few things here. The concept of calorie density refers to how much energy is in a given food by weight. The lower a food's calorie density, the more volume of a food a person can consume without consuming a lot of calories. On the other hand, the higher a food's calorie density, typically the easier it is to consume more energy through that food. For our purposes, we'll calculate calorie density by how many calories are in 100 grams of a given food. A food is of low calorie density if it is 0 to 99 calories per 100 grams. Medium calorie density is 100 to 299 calories per 100 grams of the food. High calorie density is 300 to 699 calories per 100 grams, and very high is 700 calories plus per 100 grams. Some examples of food with low calorie density include nearly all fresh fruits and vegetables, and even some legume products such as green peas, silken tofu, and plant-based milks. By the way, I get these examples from a terrific chart in Simon Hill's book, The Proof is in the Plants. See the show notes for page numbers and a link to that book. Some examples of medium or moderate calorie density include most legumes and whole grains, so think beans, lentils, chickpeas, oats, wheat, rice, barley, and more, as well as a few higher energy fruits such as avocados and dates. Finally, some examples of foods with a high calorie density include nuts and seeds, dried fruit, and typically foods with more processing, less water, and maybe some added fat and sugar such as granola. Most protein powders fall into the high density category as well. Although a typical serving of protein powder is around the 30-gram range, given the means of calculation, as far as these categories go, it would fall here. And then very high calorie density encompasses things like cooking oils. Okay, that's a bit about what foods fall where. The tip I gave at the top of the episode for calorie density was full range of calorie density. Why didn't I just say emphasize high calorie density if the way to achieve gains is through calorie surplus? Well, because I didn't want to oversimplify. I don't want someone taking my advice and just downing only protein shakes and handfuls of nuts. While both protein shakes and nuts are suitable and can be important for achieving healthy plant-based muscle gains, to focus only on foods in the high calorie density category means that you're missing out on a balanced diet. Plus, you could be in danger of overconsuming energy. The low and medium calorie density categories contain so many terrific foods for our overall health. Foods that provide essential vitamins and minerals, as well as non-essential compounds like phytonutrients that are beneficial for overall health. Getting a variety of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes alongside your nuts, seeds, and protein powders is key. Foods high and moderate in caloric density will help you meet your energy intake requirements, while those in low density category will help to round out your overall dietary pattern and maintain a well-balanced intake of healthy foods. Next, let's talk about plant protein. First things first regarding this topic. Although we've talked about it before, see episode 25, here's a quick recap about the complete versus incomplete protein myth. All plants have all 20 amino acids, which by definition includes all 9 essential amino acids, which our bodies cannot make and therefore we must get from our food. Let me say that again. All plants have all 9 essential amino acids, which we must get from our food. Thus, the term incomplete protein is a misnomer. So why all the confusion? Here's my guess. Some plants have what's called a limiting amino acid, which means a certain essential amino acid only present in that particular food in relatively small amounts, which, if it were the only food eaten, would limit the amount of proteins that the body could make. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Not having enough of a particular essential amino acid, which again must be obtained from our food, is like not having enough of a particular building material necessary for assembling a wall or a house. So if someone were only eating rice, for instance, she would not get enough lysine. But if she were eating a variety of plant foods, there would be no need for concern. She'd get that lysine elsewhere. Regardless of whether you eat an omnivorous diet or a plant-exclusive diet, none of us should be eating just one food. A diversity of whole foods with an emphasis on plants is crucial for good health. Plus, by eating a diversity of plant foods, we can easily meet our daily protein requirements. So please stop using the term incomplete protein. Thank you. That covered, I want to give one bit of caution as far as getting your protein from plant sources, because this tip is high plant protein. Remember, depending on where you're getting your protein, be mindful of fiber. Most of us could stand to gain from eating more fiber. However, let's say if you're something like a 180-pound male looking to achieve 10 to 15 pounds of lean muscle gain, and you're looking to get most of your protein from whole plant sources like beans, you're going to be getting most of that through legumes, which are packed with fiber. Don't hear me say to avoid beans. Eat them. By all means, beans and lentils are terrific foods. However, if you're experiencing gastrointestinal distress because you're overdoing it, you may want to consider some minimally to moderately and perhaps even some highly processed foods to get you to the protein thresholds that you're hoping to hit without overdoing the fiber. While you may need to eat more moderately processed and even some highly processed foods, something key to keep in mind is that there are different definitions out there for levels of processing, and all too often terms like ultra-processed foods are thrown out casually and with little true understanding. So before you stop listening to this episode, however, this doesn't mean I'm advocating Oreos, instant ramen, and the like. Far from it. When we consider a food's level of processing, it is also important to consider its purpose and its nutrition profile. So first, to say a few words about a food's purpose, Is the item processed in order to save the consumer time, performing steps that a person could do at home but might not want to take the extra time to do? For example, making nut milk at home is super easy. Making soy milk at home would be a bit more involved, but still doable. Plant-based milks are processed foods, but they are not necessarily items to be avoided. Purchasing ready-made nut milks and soy milks save the consumer time and effort in the kitchen, making plant-based eating easier and more sustainable. The same goes with items like tofu, nut butters, pickles, cooking oils, etc. Another simple example here is canned beans. These have been processed. They've been cooked and typically salted as well. But there's a world of difference between a can of black beans and a box of Pop-Tarts, right? Rather than simply toss terms around without understanding, like, just something being processed, we could learn from what nutrition and public health professionals have worked to develop. One tool is the NOVA classification system, which looks at the extent of processing and the purpose of processing, and thus places foods into one of 4 categories as a result. In a lecture about NOVA, Professor Carlos Monteiro defines ultra-processed foods as industrial formulations of several ingredients that include original or chemically modified food substances obtained with the fractioning of whole foods and additives used to make the final product palatable or highly palatable. The aim is to make convenient, tasteful, and low-cost products liable to replace all other NOVA food groups, which includes the 3 preferable categories of 1, fresh or minimally processed foods, 2, what NOVA calls processed culinary ingredients, so that's things like olive oil and iodized salt, and 3, processed foods more generally. Carlos Monteiro is professor of nutrition and public health at the University of Sao Paulo and an epidemiologist who both coined the term ultra-processed food and introduced the NOVA classification system. I've linked this video lecture in the show notes if you'd like to learn more. So leaning on a classification system like NOVA's, it's probably best to avoid ultra-processed foods. And yet, you may find that you'll want to hand select a few to include in your dietary pattern, such as protein powders and plant-based meat alternatives. And this brings us to consider nutrition profile. As the elegantly designed and run swap meat trial showed, highly processed plant-based meat alternatives beat out, quote, whole food, high-quality, unprocessed meats as far as participant health markers were concerned. This was a crossover trial, which means that both groups received both interventions, meat versus plant-based meat alternatives, and those who were randomized to the plant-based meat alternative group first even seemed to have a protective carryover effect, which made their responses to the meat, which they ate second, less extreme than those who ate the real meat during the first phase of the trial. All this to say, if you are prejudiced against ultra-processed foods simply because of their processing, this elegant and rigorous study causes us to question our assumptions. We have to look at the evidence, real-life situations and outcomes in human beings eating the actual food products. Let me say it again. Plant-based meat alternatives fared better than actual meat for human health outcomes. This is for reasons like the fact that they had more fiber and less saturated fat. But check out the show notes for a link to the swap meat trial to dig in more. I really encourage you to take a look at it. Also check out the link to the paper that our former guest, Dr. Matthew Nagra, contributed to on this topic as well. So opting for minimally processed products like tofu or moderately and highly processed foods like protein powders and plant-based meat alternatives, or even mycoprotein products, those made from fungi, which technically speaking isn't a plant, these could be a great way for you to achieve your plant protein goals without over-consuming fiber. But again, beans and lentils deserve a place at the table and on your plate. At risk of oversimplifying, they are one of the healthiest foods you could possibly be consuming. Just recognize that you'll probably want to make your meals with beans and another form of high protein but low to moderate fiber food. Finally, as we've already been alluding to in both of the previous tips, the third tip is balance. By this, I basically mean Eat a range of foods. Eat a diversity of plant foods and be sure to include lots of whole and minimally processed foods alongside any of the moderately to highly processed options that you decide to consume. This is to ensure you get a range of macro and micronutrients and from varying sources. The last thing that we want is for a health goal to make us so narrowly focused that we end up excluding the variety of health-promoting foods we could be eating for only a select few promoting one singular end goal. On that note, keep in mind that protein is important, but it isn't everything. It's also important to bear in mind that we can't store protein for later. Our bodies can store excess carbohydrate and fat, but not protein. Anything you don't use gets turned into carbs and or fat and gets stored. So at the end of the day, excess is excess. And part of balance is enjoyment. While you may have fitness goals you're looking to meet, remember that food is not just fuel. It is for sharing and connecting over with friends and family. It is about enjoyment and delight. Seek out ways to keep this aspect of food alive as well and maintain a healthy relationship with food. As I wrap up this episode, I want to commend one more resource to you. I am not an expert in diet and body composition. I want to assure you that it is possible to achieve your lean muscle goals on a plant-based diet, but I recognize that my knowledge is limited in this area. To learn more about energy balance and body composition, see the terrific Sigma statement put out by Sigma Nutrition titled The Calories In, Calories Out Confusion, a comprehensive guide to understanding energy balance. I've linked this in the show notes. This covers energy intake and expenditure, changes in body mass and tissue type, especially fat versus muscle. It covers fat oxidation, macronutrients, and food quality, the influence of resistance training, sleep, and more. I highly commend this resource. Please do check it out. Whether this episode was for you or you're simply listening in for the sake of interest or sharing it with a friend, thanks for tuning in. It's always a delight to have you join me here on Eating for Eden. If you have questions or want to suggest a topic for a future episode, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to edenandme@substack.com. Also, if you've been enjoying this podcast, please consider leaving a review. I'd love to grow the reach of the podcast here in 2025, and I need your help to do so. Thank you so much in advance. If you want recipes, head over to edenandme.com, where you can find a variety of delicious recipes to bring what you're learning into the kitchen. Finally, become an email subscriber on Substack to have new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you appreciate the work I'm doing and want to support the show, you'll also have the option of becoming a paid subscriber. That's all for now, friends. Until next time, be well. Thanks for listening to Eating for Eden. If you found this episode informative or inspiring, please consider sharing it with a friend. Climate change is an issue we all need to tackle together, so let's invite others to journey along with us as we continue the conversation and start taking action. Until next week, friends, take care.